Okay, I think I'm gonna just start with the technicality so we save some time later. So hello everyone, and welcome to the 34th Edith Mary Gayton Memorial Lecture. My name is Giorgos Gadanakis, and I am the Director of the Farm Management Unit of the School of Agriculture Policy and Development at the University of Reading. I just want to make sure that you are familiar with the MS Teams live events, and therefore I just opened my microphone and my camera so to ensure you that the event will go live, and we will start in the next couple of minutes. Just because I received some emails with people saying that they are here but they cannot hear any sound, so just to ensure that the event will indeed take place in the next few minutes. Now, the way that things will work for everyone is that you will not be able to open your microphone or your camera unless you are a presenter. So, as you would have already realized, some of you have a Q&A session on the MS Teams application. So please use that for posting questions during the event. We already have 250 people registered for the event. So I believe that we will have many questions because it is a very interesting topic. I will be managing most of them on the background. The event will have a duration of an hour maximum. So I'm not sure if we will be able to address all of the questions. Our intention is to do that, and I will work on the background to try and summarize similar questions into one. So apologies if I don't exactly address the question. Our speaker also has access to the Q&A session, so if there is something that I have missed, then he will take over to answer that question. Okay, so it's 5 o'clock, so we are ready to go. I will invite my colleague, Richard Tranter, a professor of agricultural economics in the School of Agriculture Policy and Development, who will, first of all, provide few information about the Edith Mary Gayton and her role, and also the contribution that she has made to the Farm Management Unit. And he will also introduce our speaker for this evening. And just a reminder again that questions will need to be posted via the Q&A session on the MS Teams. So there's a Q&A chat function in the MS Teams application. So please use that in the duration of the event for questions for our speaker. So Richard, the digital floor is yours.
Thank you, Yorgos, and good evening, everyone. The FMU, or Farm Management Unit, was established in 1979 to promote excellence in farm management at the University of Reading. It coordinates research and consultancy, and also provides a focus for outreach activities in the wider farming world. Now, in the mid-1980s, the university received a substantial bequest from the family of Edith Mary Gayton in her memory, as she had studied agriculture here between the wars. The FMU was tasked to manage this bequest. This is now primarily used to fund this annual lecture and PhD studentships on farm management topics when the funds are available. We have had around 15 of these PhD students under our banner over the years, and all of them, I'm pleased to say, have subsequently thrived in the agricultural industry and are making a good impact every day. Now, our speaker tonight is Jake Freeston. who's manager of the long-standing and splendid 1,500-hectare Overbury farms in the Cotswolds. Jake was educated at Seal Hayne College in Devon. Before joining Overbury Farms in 2003, Jake worked for the Duke of Buccleuch's Boughton Estate in Northamptonshire and then for Velcourt in Kent. In 2012, Jake was awarded a Nuffield Scholarship to study sustainable farming systems using the principles of the LEAF organisation. He is a regular and most accomplished speaker at farming events, and I'm sure that we will find his lecture tonight most interesting. Jake, the floor is yours.
Warm welcome, Richard. Thank you very much indeed for that very warm welcome indeed. And I'm just really sorry that I'm unable to be there in person with everybody. It sounds like a really fun event, not just an educational one, but also a social one. And I think that's really important in our agricultural industry to be able to meet up and share conversation and different experiences. So I'm just going to share my screen now. I hope that this is all visible to everybody. As I say, I'm really delighted and thrilled to have been asked to come and present to you this evening, which is an odd experience, sitting in my kitchen at home in Gloucestershire, Worcestershire, talking to you. But we're going to talk about regenerative agriculture and how that impacts not just our carbon footprint actually, but our overall biodiversity, our economics of the farming business, and the journey really that we've been on to reach this far. So really we're going to start with a bit of an introduction and an overview into the estate business. I want to talk to you about where I started here at Overbury back in 2003. Where we are now, which is actually an important move from where we originated, and then also where we're going. And this is the exciting bit, actually. We're just sort of scratching the skin of carbon in the farming business and what that might well be able to unlock in the future. So really, this is me. I did my Nuffield Farming Scholarship as Richard was just saying back in 2012, and then 13 was my year out and about. Looked all around the world for innovative methods to try and break the wheat yield plateau in the UK, and from Oklahoma, which I'll talk about in a little while, to Idaho, down to New Zealand, into Ireland. It was a fantastic experience, not just the Nuffield alumni have become great friends, but actually also a fantastic learning experience. And if there's anybody that's under the age of 45 out there that's interested in a Nuffield Farming Scholarship, just look at the website, because it really is a life-changing experience. So we've picked up a few awards along the way, and I think probably the one I'm most proud about is the 2020 Soil Farmer of the Year award. But I started off, my parents were teachers, so I come from a non-farming background. And one of the sayings, I suppose, or quotes that has stuck with me through my Nuffield Scholarship was one by Nelson Mandela, which says that it always seems impossible until it is done. And that is something that we're working hard here at Overbury to try and push the boundaries, I suppose, of production, both of cereals and of livestock. So the farm here, the in-house bit, is about 1,600 hectares. We have a contract farming agreement with a next door farm of 250 hectares of combinable crops. We're a really mixed and varied farm in terms of soil type, and we will cover the different soil types as we go through the presentation, and we talk a little bit about how carbon and how regenerative agriculture is impacting on those soil types. So we start at 1,000 foot above sea level, thin Cotswold brash on a lump of limestone. Then we come down the slopes, all south facing, some of them quite steep slopes, into sand over gravel, and then we have Evesham series clay below that. We combine about 950 hectares here. We let 100 hectares out for field scale vegetables, hand-picked peas, dwarf beans and beetroot. And our combinable crops really are focused on first wheats with oilseed rape, linseed, peas, beans, and quinoa, soya in the past, and we'll talk a little bit about rotations as we go through the presentation later on. To complement the arable side of things, and it really is a complementary part of the business, we have 300 hectares of permanent grass, or just over, a lot of which is in Grade 2 listed parkland. We have an outdoor lambing ewe flock of 1,100 ewes, North Country mules, and Romney Cross, what are they called? Romney Cross other sheep, whose name slips my mind. And we're just moving back to Aberfields, that's it. We're just moving back actually to a self-contained, self-breeding, self-replacing homebred ewe here on the farm, trying to develop our own ewe flock for our own conditions. We've just been accepted into a higher tier stewardship scheme, and we're a leaf linking environment and farming demonstration farm, have been since 2012. And technology has always played a big role in the farming enterprises here. So we're an agri-EPI satellite farm with 6 full-time employees, and my job is made particularly easy by the skills that I have on the farm here in those guys, with an average service of over 40 years. So a lot of experience to call upon. From Oklahoma, this was where my passion for soil, I guess, was really ignited. And I had a few weeks there looking at some of the history of what happened in the 1930s and the Great Dust Bowl. And it really was quite a frightening experience to think that the soil could be so mismanaged, coupled with extreme weather, to create such huge problems. And I was in Ardmore, where the Noble Foundation is, and Lloyd Noble in 1913, who founded the research centre there, said that the land must continue to produce our food, our clothing and our shelter long after the oil has gone. And that stuck with me quite considerably, because that really is the fundamental part of our soil and how we can manage it. And management strategies can be completely different. This was my light bulb moment in Oklahoma, looking at 20 years difference of soil management effectively. On the left-hand side here, we have a deeply or a higher organic matter sampled soil, lots of crop residue in the background that you can see, 20 years of no-till. They just had 2 inches of rainfall at this point, and that rain had actually soaked into the soil. So that farmer had a medium that he could actually grow a crop in. The other side of the road, the much more traditional way of farming was, once the headers had been through, was to put a deep ripper in there, pull it around a few times, removed all the soil structure, removed all the organic matter. And actually, when that 2 inches of rain came, it capped on the soil surface. And then in 110°F and a strong wind, that water disappeared. And to me, this was the difference about having a crop or having the ability to plant a crop and earn a living or not. And this is something that I think we're going to have to learn to manage as weather patterns and climate change occurs more and more. And so that brings you back to carbon and the carbon within the soil, and how do we think about carbon to make it accessible and something you can actually imagine in your eye. And as the Reading School of Farm Management, you'll all be particularly au fait, I know, with balance sheets. So I was having to think about the farm and where the assets may well lie in terms of carbon. You have the long-term assets, farm woodland, hedges, woodland and peat, wetlands and peat, that sort of thing. You've got appreciating assets, so things that are capturing carbon on almost an annual basis. New trees that you plant, any temporary grass, increase in soil organic matter. And again, we'll come back to that later on. And that's going to play quite a part of my presentation as to what we can do to increase that appreciating asset. And we need to think about soil as an asset. And then your liabilities as well, equally as important. Cultivating land is potentially a liability if we're thinking about the polluter pays principle of soil erosion, pesticides, phosphates in water. So you've got the one side of the balance sheet, and then you've got the profit and loss on the other side. So this is more the annual improvements in woodland, grassland and soil improvements. And your variable costs, your variable emissions, effectively, how much fertilizer depends on or your carbon release depends on the amount of fertilizer, the amount of feed or forage. And then your sort of fixed emissions, the number of livestock, the type of cultivations you do. So effectively, we can run the farm as a set of accounts when we're talking about carbon. And that's really, really important. So historically, if we look back, this is where we started. It was a very traditional farming system. Nothing wrong in its day, but we were ploughing quite considerably in the early 2000s. We moved to a carrier and a subsoiling type system, depending on the soil type that we had. And then a top-down came into the scene in 2011, followed up by a horse drill. And this was the very traditional and is still widely practiced way of establishing arable crops. But this was expensive. So we tried, as we may, to try and reduce those costs of production, those costs of fuel, fertilizer, wearing parts, labour. But actually all of those were giving us quite small reductions in cost, although over an area they mounted up. We were running quite a lot of depreciation and quite high running costs. And then as a result of my Nuffield scholarship, we came to the conclusion really that we needed to manage our soils better. And in order to do that, to have a more sustainable farming business, and we were looking at it purely from an economic point of view at this time, not really realising the appreciation of carbon within the soil, not really ticking the boxes for biodiversity and biodiversity net gain, and also then payments that we're looking at now in the future for sustainable farming incentive, and so on and so forth. So it really was an economic decision at the moment that brought us to regenerative agriculture. And the four principles of Regen Ag, we're going to just briefly touch on those. Minimise soil disturbance. This is absolutely crucial when it comes to carbon. Every time we move through the soil, we're aerating it and releasing carbon into the atmosphere. Really, really fundamental to the operation is keeping the soil covered. A great expression I heard in Idaho was "Don't farm naked." You know, we need to keep the soil covered, protected from wind and sun and rain. The picture in Oklahoma definitely demonstrated that. Soil rills that you may well see on slopes now after fields have been worked. Really, really important to try and keep that covered. Another great expression is soil armour, and that's, you know, it's what we're trying to do, whether that's straw residue or a cover crop, manure applications. It's keeping that soil covered, protected, and we'll talk about that as we go forward. And then long and diverse rotations. This is again really, really important when we're looking at some of the pesticide issues that we have at the moment. Active ingredients being withdrawn from use, resistance coming and cropping up more and more as we go forward. So we have some challenges as an industry to be able to keep going and keep producing food in the necessary amounts as required. And then for me, livestock integration, if you have a pyramid, if you like, this is the very top of that pyramid, the enable to get livestock onto those arable fields. You know, none of this is new. The golden hoof, as it were, has been around for hundreds of years, but we've sort of lost sight of that in the last few years for economic reasons primarily. But this is something that we need to try and get back into our farming systems. So when we come to trying to minimise the damage to our soils, it's all season dependent and cropping dependent. So this was us putting right some damage, or, you know, after a double crop of salad onions, this was between the first and the second crop. Lots of irrigation, then lots of heavy traffic on those fields. And it took 4 or 5 years for this part of the corner of the field to actually recover. And, you know, the sort of knock-on effect of a crop like that, yes, you can take a short-term margin, but if you look at the longer-term effect on the soil health, water infiltration, soil organic matter, it goes on for much more than just that 1 year. So we switched in 2015 to a no-till farming system. We bought a cross-slot drill, came up from New Zealand, and this is what I like to see, drilling into freshly combined stubbles, crop residue on the surface, providing that soil armour. The soil will be 10 degrees cooler under that little armour of rape residue than without it, and that's really important when we're looking at biological function within the soil. It's also retaining moisture under there. It's stopping the wind kind of drying out the soil surface, important for getting cover crop seeds to germinate and then for them to grow. So it really is crucial. It's helping water to infiltrate. This is in August, which is traditionally our wettest month of the year, although I probably need to go back and relook at those statistics after the last 2 winters. But historically, August has been our wettest month. And in our old system of exposed cultivated land, heavy rainfall on there, capping the surface, anything with a slope on it, and we've got a lot of south-facing slopes, we were exposing ourselves to erosion. We've removed that. But not only that, we're actually reducing our carbon footprint quite significantly. So establish our crops, historically, we were doing the equivalent of 123 tonnes of CO2 emissions, and we've got that down to 63 tonnes. So we're virtually halved that. That's using 1,400 hectares of cropping and cover crop establishment versus the 900 hectares that we were before, with our fuel use going from 52 litres a hectare down to 17. And if you bring that through to our cost of production, we're looking at a significant reduction in those costs, which helps us in terms of the economic sustainability of our farming business. It's also reduced our horsepower reduction from 680 horsepower down to 370 if we're just drilling, or 490 if we're having to roll at the same time. But no-till on its own won't work. It needs a few mates in there to help prop the scrum up, if you like. And one of those most significant ones is cover cropping. We need to keep the soil alive. We need to keep capturing carbon through sunshine and putting sugars out down into the soil to restructure it, to aerate it, to feed the soil biology. So cover crops play a huge role in making this system work. They have a cost, but that cost is easily offset by so many of the benefits that these cover crops can actually bring to our system. And I think in terms of carbon, one of the things that we're definitely interested in is reducing soil compaction. Compaction makes anaerobic soils, which tends to burn off a lot of carbon from the soil. They help to build soil organic matter by putting root sugars, root exudates, out to feed the soil bugs and feed that the microhabitat under the ground, which is improving soil health, but also improving and encouraging pollinators. You know, cover crops of radishes and mustard that are flowering in November, we have bees in now, and a few years ago you would wonder where on earth those creatures, those insects that were keen to be out and about at that time of year, what would they have been feeding on? And in terms of public goods and public benefits, water infiltration, so reducing downstream flooding risks. We're about 6 miles probably up the road from Tewkesbury, and Tewkesbury floods on a regular basis. And you know, things that we can do to try and absorb more moisture, and we'll come on to this in a bit, is really, really important. And this, I just love this picture because this shows us graphically that the benefit of carbon dioxide and water going in versus a bare soil where we are releasing carbon dioxide through oxygenating the soil and removing moisture every time we go through that soil. So that is a really, really important slide. But cover crops don't need to be a monoculture. I think if you look into nature, you look around you, nothing is really a monoculture. It's diversity, it's mixtures. And this, although it's a graphic, shows very nicely how different roots from different crops and different species have different effects on the soil, whether that's a deep rooting taproot to go down and mine nutrients and bring those to the surface, or a small tilth creating root like a linseed or a phacelia. They all have their place. So mixtures of 10, 15, 20 way species really, really need to be thought about. It's that diversity where we've got a herd of animals underneath the ground, fungi and bacteria. They all have specific roles. We don't really know much about them, but the more diversity, the more varied a diet we can give them, the more healthy that they're likely to be. And it's all about operations and organisation for me. So we've got the 5-minute fallow. At this time of year in August, there's warm soil, there's usually a bit of moisture around, you've got long day length, and you can get a huge amount of benefit from those cover crop seeds. Cover crops planted on the 7th of August were giving us 5 tonnes a hectare dry matter increase by the end of November, whereas if you left that to the 7th of September, those same mixtures were only giving 1.5 tonnes a hectare of dry matter. So really, we need to be on the ball with this to try and get cover crops established within 24 hours, ideally 5 minutes. Little bit of a cheat, but you know, as soon as we can chase the combine out of the drill, with combine out of the field with the drill, is where we want to be. Spend reflects time. So the longer the cover crop is going to be in the ground, the more I'm inclined to spend a little bit of money on getting that cover crop species right. And that would include things like legumes, vetches, the more expensive seeds, anything that is going to have a bare patch for 5 weeks would get a cover crop on it. And if it's a short-term cover crop like that, something like mustard, can be very quickly established to put roots into the ground and open the soil up and keep that soil alive, keep it oxygenated, ready for that next crop to come in. Diversity is crucial, and timing is absolutely everything. And some of the biggest effects are on our biodiversity and our wildlife. And this is some work done by Wessex Water on a cover crop trial. And I want to thank Tim from Nuffield for these pictures. Yes, we do get more pests in our cover crops, but actually we get an awful lot more beneficial insects and predators, to the point where I'm not so worried about having pests around to the same degree. So the top slide here, the top pick photograph on the right, shows the contents, if you like, from a 7-day pitfall trap. On the left-hand side, we've got the beneficials, so carabid beetles, rove beetles, springtails, spiders, huge population there, predating the things on the right-hand side, the flies and the slugs on there. And then the bottom picture was from a fallow plot for over 7 days. And we've got a lot more pests in there. So there's cabbage stem flea beetles, we all love those, aphids and flies, and some beneficials, but nowhere near the same amount that's in that cover crop. So really, really important to be able to try and tap into some of the biodiversity that we have around that can help us. And cover crop also helps us in terms of our water infiltration. This was up on the hill. We had a PhD student working with us from Gloucestershire University, and we're noticing that we're having less water runoff, and we're storing more water in our fields. A 1% increase organic matter can store about 100,000 litres more water, which equates to about 20 mil of rainfall. And on some of our thin soils, that is really, really important and can be directly correlated to yield. So water infiltration, absolutely crucial. And that comes from a whole host of different species, as I said, and different root characteristics. So this was some cover crop from this year. We've got a sunflower. This was a cover crop that was 3 months old, planted after hand-picked peas at the beginning of July. This was the day before we put winter barley for seed into these crops. And we've got sunflowers on the right, a huge mass of tilth creation there. That was just a crumbly, sweet smelling lump of soil all held together. It wasn't going anywhere at all. And then on the left-hand side, sorry, we've got a radish root that was burrowing down, removing compaction, and having some huge effects right the way through the rotation. By not cultivating those soils, when those roots die, they just become a channel for either an earthworm or for air or for water. Really, really important. And we know that cover crops can be better at tillage in terms of these creations. 80% of the work needed through cultivation is done to remove the compaction that we're putting in during that cultivation operation. So if we can reduce that, we reduce the need to get any deeper. But then we also need to think about how we remove that cover crop as well. So how do we disrupt it? At the moment, we're using glyphosate. That may well not be around forever, but it's a key part of this system. If we didn't have that, we would be into topping it and cultivations and disking it potentially to try and kill what is currently there. So it's sort of the lesser of the two evils, I suppose. But at the moment, it's a necessary part of regenerative agriculture, and I would not want to be going what I would see as a backward step if they ever banned it and then we were forced to cultivate to try and remove these. Obviously, there are options for sheep for grazing with us, so nearly all of our cover crops will get grazed. This was a black oat and vetch cover crop with radishes and phacelia and buckwheat and things like that in. Buckwheat dies when it gets to about 5 degrees C, so that sort of disappears. But these other crops need to be taken out through grazing, or this was a crimping experiment that we were having a look at. And again, the crimping role, great in theory, but our UK weather doesn't allow us to get cold enough to do a job with the crimping. and you know, wet weather, maritime climates gives us some challenges in terms of physical destruction. Nutrient supply, we're looking up all these nutrients. We're looking up 150, 200 kilos of nitrogen in some of these crops. A proportion of that we've applied to the previous crop, which is 65% efficient in nitrogen at best. And then the balance of that either leaches down through the soil or volatilizes into the atmosphere. But we're planting seeds into the following crop into this nutrient shortage, I suppose, deficient state, because we've locked it up in all the growing green matter. So seedbed nutrition is really, really important, and you know, the right drill with enough seed hoppers and fertilizer hoppers enables us to do that. And also the pests we've sort of mentioned, less of a worry for me now, either diseases as well. But if we're not into growing cover crops, then perhaps we've got some other options as well. So we're using some biosolids. We've got a straw for muck deal with a neighbour. We're mixing poultry litter and straw from the stud to create a nice carbon nitrogen balanced manure to go onto the field. So we're trying to have a mixed diet as possible for the herd under the ground, if you like. We've got livestock grazing stubble turnips and cover crops. We've got crop residue from chopped straw, and then we've got these manure applications going in as well. So this is really important in terms of cover cropping. And this, I love the picture with the residue. There, you can't see the soil there at all. To me, that's perfect. And sometimes we just can't grow enough residue. After pulses, for instance, and after linseed, there's just not the residue there to protect the soil. And rotation, really, really crucial. Oilseed rape and wheat, still, you know, wheat is the main function. It's those two are the highest gross margin drivers. We're still growing oilseed rape successfully in our farming system. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But then that's interspersed with barley, both spring barley, winter barley, peas. And then we're looking at some other crops as well in terms of soya, winter linseed, and quinoa, just looking to extend the rotation to give us some marketing options, some labour and machinery profile variation, different times of drilling, different times of harvesting, to see how those can fit into our system, and actually also trying to connect with local consumers in terms of growing British produce, British quinoa, British soya, although we have dropped that because we weren't getting on that well with it. But I think it's early days, and we do need to have a look at these sorts of alternative crops that we can have a look at. And then the sheep playing a vital role in cover crop disruption, but also benefiting the sheep enterprise significantly as well. This was grazing oats and vetch, that had all that had survived. There was Phacelia in there, the buckwheat had gone. And this was a February 2 years ago. We were just about pre-lambing vet and med and vaccines and things like that. So grazing out on the cover crops has meant we don't need to house the sheep anymore. That saved significant amount of money in terms of straw, in terms of hay and concentrates. Healthier sheep living outdoors. This is right up on the top of the hill. We're sort of 800 foot above sea level, 900 foot above sea level here. And then the beauty of the system is that we can actually go drilling spring barley while the sheep are still in the field. If the weather's right, we want to get going, go and drill, roll it, move the sheep out after a couple of days, and then pop in with a bit of glyphosate and pre-emergence herbicide all in one go. So it is a win-win situation for both enterprises. The golden hoof, making that nutrient more available from the actual crop, and they're ready for those spring barley plants to take it up. And oilseed rape, as I mentioned, features really highly in our rotation, and it's something that with the right techniques we've been able to still grow without the cabbage stem flea beetle pressure. This year the pressure has been greatly reduced, but this was a bit of a trial between oilseed rape with companion cropping. So the companion cropping is vetch and buckwheat, berseem clover and Phacelia, about 13 kilos a hectare, no pre-emergence herbicide at all, versus no companion next to it. Very little flea beetle damage across the board, no insecticides, no fungicides to date, and we won't put insecticide on across the farm at the moment, trying to improve that biodiversity and build those pest numbers. But we did some trials, and actually what we were finding was that the tissue analysis from the oilseed rape with companion crop was much more balanced and had much fewer deficiencies than the straight oilseed rape. They had both grown about 1.8 tonnes per hectare of dry matter just of oilseed rape, but then we had another 2 tonnes a hectare of dry matter of companion cropping that was capturing nitrogen, putting a lot more roots down into the soil to feed the soil bugs in there. And then we sprayed this off just before Christmas, and now we've got a good stand of oilseed rape in there. So all of these techniques, adding manures, not mineralizing nitrogen or carbon from the soil, all go towards capturing carbon and putting that into our carbon footprint. And it's important to be able to measure that footprint, to actually have a look at how it stacks up as a business. And I just wanted to pull this through. This was from January last year, looking at our carbon footprint for our crop inputs. And what really frightened me when I first did this was the carbon footprint element of synthetic fertilizers. 73% ammonium nitrate, 13.4% of urea, and a little bit of manure, MOP, muriated potash. But effectively 80, if you add those together, you get to, I think, 86% of the crop input is fertilizer, and that is absolutely huge. So by capturing more carbon and having more organic matter, we are actually reducing the need for as much synthetic fertilizer. And this is a journey that I think we all need to go on as an industry, how we can make better use of the nitrogen we do use, but fundamentally using less. And if you pull that through right the way down to our overall farm carbon footprint, you see our crop input there, which is effectively nitrogen fertilizer, comes to 50% of the overall farm carbon emission in terms of CO2 tons equivalent. And then you look on the flip side of that, you look at soil organic matter, capturing and storing 96% of the sequestration of the farm. So these are some really huge numbers, but really important ones. And this is why we're so focused on soil organic matter and trying to build soil carbon to have a healthier soil, able to tolerate more extremes of weather, and also be able to generate more profit. And this is just some figures actually that have just come back in the last few days, is looking at soil organic matter since 2014. We've got the blue line, which is sand and gravel, which has moved from 3.87 to 5.66. We've got the heavy land, which is the red line, and that's gone from 3.22 to 5.25, and then the brash land, the green at the top, 4.73 up to 6.01. This is over an 8-year period, and that's average increase of 1.7% or 0.2% per year. So we're actually, with everything that we're doing, we're getting some really significant increases in terms of our soil carbon, and that is really important going forward. And I know we're running short of time, but let's just look literally for a second about where we are heading, what's next on the agenda. So for me, we're looking at capturing more carbon more effectively, quicker and faster, and for that we need to use C4 plants, things like maize, sunflowers, millet. So this was the crop that the sunflowers were in, actually, that we looked at earlier on. 3 months of growth, absolutely vast amount of carbon captured and banged into the soil. It's all about more biology and less chemistry, and I think that's going to be dictated by government legislation as we go forward, but actually we need to be taking the lead on this as farmers and practitioners on our own farms. This is what we want to see more of: integrated farm management, integrated pest management. This was in a cover crop of beans and oats that we did right at the start of this journey, and I've actually got it in a video, and you can kind of see the aphids squirming. I shouldn't really take pleasure in it, but for me, this is where we need to get to. We need to be working with nature and with biology against some of the things that are threatening our pests. And I think by having a more biological system, we will have a more balanced system. And that starts with the roots, and that starts with the plants, with an improved rhizosphere. So that interaction between the plant and the root happens in that microclimate around those root sheaths and those root hairs. And in order to get that right, we need to reduce our cost of production, very importantly, but we need to improve our soil health. Should put those the other way around, really. And in order to do all of that, we need to reduce synthetics, whether that's fertilizer, whether that's pesticides. We don't use fungicide seed dressings anymore on our crops. We use manganese and zinc only, and some biological activities, which is saving us some money, increasing our profit, but actually making our plants more healthy, which is really important, and it's where we want to be. And then we can actually measure some of this on farm in our own kitchens. It's child's play. This is Georgia helping me out, looking at 3 different soils. And what's important to have a look at here is the F to B ratio, which is the fungal to bacteria relationship. And we're after about a 1-to-1 relationship. And you can see in the first field, Sheldon's, that's on the top of the hill on the brash, almost there, 48% fungi, fantastic. The next one down, Aerodrome, this is in the vegetable rotation, 28% fungi. And what's also important is the soil microbes. So that's the micrograms of carbon per gram of soil, and between 200 and 400, it's exceeded. It's said to be low. Anything over 400 to 600 is good, and over 600 is fantastic. Aerodrome and Aston Big Ground East are the same soil type. They're just either side of a hedge, and a vegetable rotation versus a no-till rotation for 6 years, and we've got 3 times as much soil microbes in there. So it gives us a really easy, quick test. It's not very expensive to be able to do at home, literally on the kitchen table. And then further forward, creating our own sort of compost inoculum, I suppose, based on wood chip, grass, hay and straw, things that we can gather from around the farm, soil inoculum for the different soil types, laced with worms to sort of create a sort of a vermiculture, which we can then use as a seed dressing to really pump prime our seeds with a nutrient rich kind of inoculum or a juice to get them out of the ground as fast as we possibly can. So carbon and soil management are at the forefront of everything we're trying to do. It's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the farms. I hope I haven't rushed, and I hope it's also sparked a lot of ideas and a lot of thoughts in people. And I think one of the real take-home messages for me is that if you can get home and have a think about reducing nitrogen fertilizer, how you can do that, how you can be more efficient with it. Biological inputs, that could just be manures, organic applications, again, manures or cover crops. We need to have a think about livestock into our farms. We've got the sheep. I don't know that that's necessarily enough. And then if you look forward to elms and sustainable farming incentives, we're looking at a whole host of different land use options, which will deliver payments over and above standard food production. And I know that there will be carbon trading and biodiversity net gain payments and opportunities in the future, whether that's on a local or a landscape area. And this is really, really important for us as farmers to be able to connect with our local environment, but also our local communities as well. It's a real opportunity, and I think the COVID-19 has demonstrated a bit more of an appetite for local food and local food production being sustainably farmed for the future. And if you really want to get out there and have a look, never be afraid to try something new. Amateurs built the Ark and professionals built the Titanic. And I think the message for there is just go and have a go, have a trial, a field, a part field, and just have a look and see if you do something different, what you may well experience that you can learn on to take it further forward. Thank you very much.
Sorry, it always happens. Thank you very much, Jake, for this. We've got plenty of questions. I'm going to start with a few easy ones that I can see here. So what software do you use to work on your carbon footprint?
Yeah, good question. There are lots and lots of carbon cutting toolkits that are available. We use the Farm Carbon Cutting Toolkit, which is designed by farmers for farmers. Really important. It's good because it's very straightforward. It takes the whole business, and it also looks at the sequestration element as well. So rather than just looking at your carbon emissions, which can, get quite depressing actually if that's all you're looking at, the fact that you can put the sequestration into there is really, really important. So that would be the first one to have a look at. And then there's also the Cool Farm tool, which you can use, and farmers have, I think, 5 or 6 different fields that you can use for free, or fields or blocks that you can use. And I think if you need to do more than that, then you're into sort of subscriptions and things like that. But both of those would be a really good place to start.
Okay, so the next one is actually exploring the difference between organic and biodynamic, between regenerative agriculture and then organic and biodynamic agriculture. So what is the difference there?
I think the main difference, and we've got an awful lot to learn from the organic farming system. I think in terms of nutrition and rotation, organic farming has got an awful lot that it can teach us, maybe more conventional farmers, how to improve what we do. I think the difference between regenerative and organic is that we are still happy to use artificial inputs. We're just looking at how we can reduce the amount that we're using and be a little bit more specific, and really taking it to the point that it is an integrated system, and the chemical can is the last, I hate the expression, but the last tool in the toolkit that you get out. You look at rotational options first, genetics, disease resistance, biological inputs, plant, trace elements to build healthier, stronger plants able to resist pests and disease better. And then you get to the can at the end of the day, which is the advantage that organic farmers don't have.
Okay, excellent. And that gives me the opportunity also to link to another question, which is, don't we need to find a way of doing this without glyphosate, assuming it is actually carcinogenic? It seems at variance with the rest of the regenerative agriculture approach.
I think the jury is still out on the carcinogenic element of glyphosate. It depends on which report you listen to. I'm still very happy to use it here. I think any synthetic input onto a field has an impact, and it is how you manage that impact. So we are using carbon additives when we use glyphosate to try and buffer the product and its effect on soil health. But if we don't have that, the impact on soil health, carbon release, potential pollution from soil erosion by cultivating fields again, I think has got much greater negative effects than the actual use of a chemical itself.
Okay, thank you very much, Jake. So the next one from John Giles, if you are able to reduce costs of production, are you required by customers to pass these savings on to them as a matter of course, or will this help offset reduced support payments under the new agricultural bill?
Really good question, and quite a tricky one. I think if I'm reducing the cost of production, I'd quite like to keep some of that in the back pockets for the owners of the estate here, having invested significantly in machinery and grain storage over the years that we've been managing here. I think it gives us a marketing edge when it comes to looking at contract farming agreements with our cost structure and the way we're farming. I think it will also unlock payments going forward. Whether it and we've got sort of huge reductions in BPS coming forward. We need to be able to offset some of those within the business and try and earn more income from different income streams. I think carbon has a degree of input into that. Biodiversity net gain, I think, will also be part of that. The ability to expand and do more farming over sort of a larger area with existing men and machinery gives us that ability. So it gives us a much more flexible approach, I think, to remaining a sort of a primary food producer.
Yeah. So let's go to the next question from Tom Sismore. Excellent presentation. Thanks, Jake. If you are relying on soil organic matter to reduce your carbon footprint, then will it get more and more difficult every year to keep adding more carbon to the soils as you reach the point where your soils become saturated with soil organic matter? And do you have plans for how else you might sequestrate carbon on the farm in 2040 when UK agriculture is supposed to be carbon neutral? So a very long question from Tom. I guess you can access also the question on the Q&A if you want to read this again, but thank you very much, Tom.
Goodness me, that's a proper essay of a question. I'd love to be in the position where we can't sequester more carbon into our soils. I think that's probably the ultimate goal as to where we want to get to. There are people around the world that are getting to that point now. I think we probably know who I'm talking about in North America, where they are, they're struggling to keep soil armour on because there's so much biology and so much carbon into that system that they're struggling to improve it any further. I think if and when we get to that stage and we're in a maritime climate, and I don't know whether we quite will get to sort of peak carbon, I suppose, in the soil, or peak soil organic matter, I guess we probably will. We will need to look at other avenues to sequester carbon, and I think one of the things we need to have a look at is where that carbon sits within the soil profile. So are we just building carbon in that first top 15, 20, 25 centimetres? How do we get it down to 1 metre, 2 metres deep? And I think within rotation, we didn't really talk about sort of grass and herb-rich species, deep rooting, lucerne and things like that to try and push carbon deeper into the soil. I think that's another huge element of the bit that we haven't really explored yet. But things I'm thinking agroforestry. I think that's got a place to play, a role to play. But it's what we do with that carbon when we harvest it. So again, it needs some thought. But yeah, deeper roots, more carbon at depth, and agroforestry, I think, are probably the things that we're going to have a look at here.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. There's one more interesting question here. Are you considering trying to market your sequestration as a public good to attract public or private funding?
Yes, we are. I think there's quite a lot of interest at the moment in trading carbon, and it's very much early days in terms of getting the right certification to be able to take that carbon and sell it and cash it in over a term of 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I think the market is developing. I'm not sure we're at a comfortable place yet to be able to accurately quantify the carbon that we have, and this is a huge problem for the industry. Is how do we measure it? We're measuring on loss on ignition. We're measuring on potassium permanganate, which is active carbon in the soil, none of which are particularly standard. I know commodity carbon is one that will just take a soil sample based on loss of ignition, and that is your carbon value or volume. But I'm not sure of the accuracy, particularly of that. It's a good guide, and for us, however inaccurate it is, if the inaccuracy is the same, you can pick a trend up. So it's a really interesting part of the jigsaw, which I think is unraveling. Well, some of it's unraveled already, but a lot of it's unraveling day by day. I think it's fascinating and really interesting.
Okay, so there's interest on. So there are some questions, a number of questions here, which they're asking: how do you actually measure the you show the picture with your daughter, I assume, using what kind of tools are you using to measure the bacteria ratio and the fungal and the microbial organisms?
Yeah, so that's a bit of kit called a microbiometer, and I'll send you the link to be able to have a look at that online. And it's basically you take the soil samples, jumble them up, you extract a small amount of it, put it in a solution, and then there's an app on your phone that sort of reads the value and gives you a measurement effectively. So it's quite new technology. It comes from South Africa. We're sort of trialing it at the moment, but from what I've seen, it's given me results and numbers that I would sort of expect. So from a farmer science point of view, I'm quite happy that, again, it's another guide. you know, how do we measure the impact of a couple of years of veg in the rotation? We take a measurement before, we do the veg cropping, and then we measure again, and you know, what has that impact been?
Okay, thank you very much, Jake. There's lots of questions. I'm trying to somehow merge or try to combine questions here, but and apologies if we're not able to answer all of the questions that are coming in. So you mentioned cover crops, but do you intercrop as well, or straight monocrop per field? Also, do you plan and manage hedgerows as well?
Yes, so we haven't got to the point of intercropping yet, but we're companion cropping with the oilseed rape. But we do take that companion crop out now. I did leave some last year to grow up all the way through the oilseed rape, thinking that the rape would hold up primarily the vetches. Excuse me, but it was the other way around. The vetches brought the rape down. It worked out okay, actually, because the vetch was quite valuable as a cover crop seed. Intercropping is something that I think has got potential as well. We've just got to work out a few logistics of finding the right varieties to grow together, the right crops to grow together. And there's a lot of work done. Andy Howard, Nuffield scholar from 2014, I think, or 2015 maybe, did his on intercropping. I can totally and highly recommend you just Google Andy Howard intercropping Nuffield, and you'll get his report up. All the Nuffield reports are free for everybody to look at. Hugely valuable resource. And that's a really good place to start. But people are growing peas and oats peas and oilseed rape together, you know, wheat and beans together. So there's lots of different oats and peas, lots of different ideas and thoughts. We're trying different varieties of wheats, so blends of wheats together to try and maximize that sort of genetic diversity within the field. And we can market that all as one sort of harvested bulk, you know, commodity, if you like. If you've got livestock in the farm, you're dairy farm, and you're making haylage out round bales or chopped silage, you know, you could put spring barley, peas, oats, you know, you could grow 2 or 3 crops together and put that all in a silage clamp or a bale, and I would imagine you would get a higher yield of the of all 3 in combination rather than the individual plots of a specific variety. We're going to try a little patch this year of C4 plants together, maize and sunflower, millet and sorghum, and we're going to try and combine that with a view to using that for birdseed to supplement our stewardship wild birdseed options, and also potentially as a base for cover crop mixes in the future.
Excellent. Great, thank you, Jake. So there's one question from Dan Kendall, which I will try to combine with a couple of more. So thanks, Jake, for the presentation. Have these improvements in soil health reflected in your yields since going regenerative? How long was the process to see similar yields to when you were plowing? And I'm going to add to this another question which I've missed now, which was about what was your main headache when you started regenerative mean tillage and regenerative agriculture? Okay, so Jake.
So yields is an interesting one. Winter crop yields, so winter wheat, winter barley, winter oilseed rape, we haven't seen a decline in yields since we stopped going into sort of cultivation or coming out of cultivation. And in fact, 2019 was probably the best harvest across the board that we'd had for a long time, significantly better. And that was sort of 4 or 5 years into the system. Harvest 20, and it's, you know, it's farming. You're sort of hero 1 minute, zero the next when harvest 2020 came along. Winter cropping, we've managed. One other question was in there. It was about, can you go straight from ploughing to no-till? And I think managing that cold turkey, for want of a better expression, is really important, because that's effectively what our soil and our plants are. They're hooked on synthetic drugs, and if you switch the tap off, you will have a bit of a shock theory, a shock expression. But you can do things to gradually wind off that. So shallower and shallower cultivations, find the right part of the rotation to go into no-till, so wheat after, oilseed rape after a winter barley, something like that. Lots of residue around. Always a good place to start, because that's the food for the biology and the earthworms. So that's a little bit of a side question. The other bit as part of that was the yields. So spring cropping has suffered. Bearing in mind we have had 17, 18, 19 and 20 have all been very, very dry springs. Beast from the east in 18 and then a drought. 2019 very, very dry until we got to cereals, when we had 5 inches of rain here, and that actually did grain fill, and that was fine. But without that 5 inches of rain, we would have been in a very difficult place. 2020 also very, very dry spring, 1.2 mil of rain in May, record temperatures. So those crops have suffered. Peas especially, spring barley less so. It's just a more resilient crop. So as a result of that, we've gone out of spring peas, gone back into winter beans to try and have crops established in the winter period, better root systems, so that they can try and be more resilient through what I think are going to be drier springs going forward. We seem to be in that pattern at the moment: wetter winters, more prolonged wet, and then more prolonged dry and heat. And all the modelling for climate change is demonstrating that is going to become more of the norm. I'm convinced that this system is giving us more reliability. It's just, we're only 6, 7 years, 8 years in places into the system, and it's, we spent a generation degrading our soils. It's going to take a generation to get that back to where it was. But this is definitely the way to go. Main headache, I think just in general, trying to work the system out. And then when you start looking at how you can integrate more biological products into, you've got to kind of unlearn. It's probably not great for Reading University in terms of how they teach students. You sort of need to unlearn the synthetic kind of system of fertilizers and fungicides at T1, T2, T3. We do this. That's been the hardest bit for me. And also as a manager, it's important, because it's not my money, to have a system that is reducing the risk. So not going cold turkey, not cutting the fertilizer too much, too far, but just try to manage that weaning off, that the shocks aren't too big. And I think as a manager, you have to be able to do that. I think as an owner occupier, you might be in a completely different position, and you only have to justify it to yourself, your bank manager, probably your wife.
Yes, the wife should be taken into consideration, of course. Okay, so I think we've got the time for a couple of more questions. Jake, if that's okay with you, we can go for another 5 minutes. So with the 1,100 ewes, could the nutrition from the pasture and cover crop diet be suitable for a dairying system? And if so, which breeds in your experience seem to be thriving on this harsher, non-shed based system? Can you just run through that again? So with the 1,100 ewes, could the nutrition from the pasture and cover crop diet be suitable for a dairying system? Yeah. And if so, which breeds in your experience seem to be performing better in this harsh environment with no shed based system? Yeah. So a cow is quite comfortable, and in fact it is using energy to keep cool down to about -40 degrees Celsius. So cows are inherently, and native breeds are more so, quite comfortable being outdoors in cold weather. What they obviously don't like is cold and wet, but I think as long as they are well fed, they're able to withstand that. I don't know about dairying all year round outside. I think that would depend on where you are in the country. I think Berkshire, Hampshire, South Coast areas, you could probably get away with it. In terms of breeds, I think you would need to look at smaller breeds that need less maintenance.
accepting a lower yield, but obviously a huge reduction in capital based in buying cows and putting up sheds and equipment, you know, and making the system mobile. There are systems around, and I know farmers are having mobile milking parlours following the cows around. Careful management and planning of the rotation so that you've got good grass wedges to be able to move cattle onto, bale grazing across the grazing platform, which is well, you know, well thought out and organised in the summer beforehand. Where we do the contract farming next door, they've got a beef herd there of pedigree red poles, and they have just started a mob grazing outdoor system in conjunction with our regenerative agriculture on the arable side of things. So it's going to be a really fascinating business to see how it develops and how we can get that interaction of cows onto the arable fields to try and improve the soil health, organic matters from their manuring, and then going back into crops after that. So it's definitely possible. You know, and people milking once a day down in Cornwall with sort of Jersey crosses, perfectly profitable businesses, and probably a better standard of, or not maybe a standard of living, but you know, not tied to having to milk at 5 in the morning and 5 at night. You know, they milk at 9:30 in the morning once a day. Cows are doing 4,500 litres, and making some reasonable money at it.
Thank you very much, Jake. So I'm unfortunately, we still got 34 more questions to answer, which unfortunately we don't have the time. We need another hour more potentially. But I would like to conclude with one last question. So how confident are you that these principles and practices will become mainstream in the next 10 years?
If I think back to when I did my Nuffield scholarship and I came back to the UK in sort of 13, 14, 15, you know, there was very little regenerative agriculture at all in the farming press, and you've only got to open some of the more published articles now and you see cover crops, you see companion crops, you see direct drills in there. So I think there is a huge swing of interest in a regenerative agriculture system. I think farming will be pushed down this line partly by legislation on the back of it being less intensive and less damaging on the environment, particularly soils. But if you look at sort of ammonia and atmospheric pollution, I think we've got challenges as an industry to try and manage that. So I think there's going to be a degree of legislation and a degree of pushing. But then I also think from a farmer's point of view, you know, the most valuable asset you have is your land. And what can you do to improve that, to improve the value of that, the capital value of it? And that is look after it, to be able to improve it, to grow crops on it that are going to be more profitable in the future. Bearing in mind BPS is going to be going, there'll be some payments that might come back from that, elms down the line. It's a huge amount of opportunity, I think, for farmers to be able to grasp this way of agriculture and really embrace it. And I think also, you know, collaborative farming as well. So farmers sort of joining together, you know, working together, reducing machinery, and having less capital involved in those individual businesses, but collectively working together collaboratively, I think has to be a huge step forward.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jake. This has been very interesting, and I think I will conclude here. So I'm not going to take any more questions. There have been plenty more to discuss. As I said, there are still 34 questions on the Q&A chat, which unfortunately won't have the time to address. So I would like to thank everyone for the active participation. I would like to thank, first of all, Jake for his time and his availability and his willingness to contribute into this discussion about regenerative agriculture and how we will be able to manage the farm carbon footprint in the future. And I guess one of the messages that I will keep is don't farm naked in all senses. So thank you very much all. It was a pleasure. And the session is recorded and it will be made available upon request by the University of Reading. So thank you very much.